Let's look at another concept. It's called aggregation. And it's a concept that says a class can be made up of other classes that represent its parts. And when we have a class that is made up of other classes, we call that class an aggregation. It supports modeling a hazard relationship between the classes. We've already used aggregation whenever we create a class that contains a string. A string is actually a class defined in C++, and when we create our own class, for example, when we created our television class, we use strings to define information in the class, like the manufacturer, and so those strings are a class that make up the class that's the television, so that's also aggregation. Generally, when we refer to it in computer science, we refer to classes that the user is creating. So let's look at an example. So here we have an aggregation. We have defined an address that is made up of strings of address, city, state, and zip. Now, we want to also have a student class, and a student has two different addresses usually. They have a permanent address and they have a school address, especially for those students who might be in the dorms. They don't really consider that their permanent address and want to keep their permanent address on file so that all the information that gets sent out will arrive in the correct location. So our student is made up of some strings and two addresses, and that would be an aggregation because we're building one class by using other classes to make up the parts needed to define the student. Let's look at another example. This one is just written in UML. And the UML symbol for aggregation is a diamond that is attached to the object that is the aggregation. And then those lines extend from the diamond to the classes that make up the aggregation. So the course is made up of a course name, which in this case, they're just using a character array to hold a string. And then it's made up of also an instructor, which is defined as a class, and a textbook, which is also defined as a class. So the aggregation is that an instructor and a textbook are part of a course. The other way to say it is a course has an instructor and a course has a textbook. And has a is the key phrase to check if something is an aggregation. You can check out another example of an aggregation if you download the Aggregation Example Circle project. And there we have a point defined, and that just has the XY coordinates. And then we have a circle that has a point that makes up the center of the circle, and then uses a radius from that center to define the full circle. Go ahead and take a look at that. It also gives you an example of the test file that can test the circle object.